So the question I've been asking this morning, if I've seen you, was, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? So if you want to know how blessed you are, I didn't have to ask anyone, will you have food for Thanksgiving this year? Isn't that awesome? Ain't God great? Yes. So, hey, here's a question. Can people change? Can people change? I mean, can they really, really change? Yeah, I think the answer is yes, but I see so many examples of people that seem to want to change, but then they don't really change. You know what I mean? What does it take to change? I mean, can a person want on the inside to change and then change takes place, or does there have to be something come from the outside that affects change in our lives? Something from outside, something from somewhere else. I want you to listen to a story about a person. This is something that happened in Jesus' ministry. And this was a guy that comes to Jesus about changing. Listen to the story. This is found in Luke chapter 18. It says, a certain ruler asked Jesus, "Good teacher, what must I do to obtain eternal life?" And Jesus replied, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except the one God. You know the commandments." So he goes on, he continues to explain. He says, you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Don't murder. Don't steal. Don't give false witness or false testimony. Honor your father and mother. There's 5 of the 10 biggies, right? And then the ruler said, "I've kept all of these things since I was a boy." And when Jesus heard this, he said, "There's one more thing. One more thing. Sell everything you own and distribute the money to the poor. And then you will have treasure in heaven." And then he says this, "Come and follow me." When he heard these words, the man became sad because he was extremely rich. When Jesus saw this, he said, "It's very hard for the wealthy to enter God's kingdom. It's easier for a camel to to squeeze through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom." Those who heard this said, "Then who can be saved?" I like Jesus' answer. He says, "What is impossible for humans is possible for God." This man is sad because he knows there's a need for change in his life. There's just one thing that he's missing. But we see in the story, apparently, that he walks away saddened because he refuses to make the changes that he needs to make to be a true follower, a close follower of Jesus Christ. And then, it's a sad story, and then almost immediately following this, starting in the chapter 19 of Luke, there's another incident. There's another person, another story where Jesus meets and finds a person who needs change in his life. And this is the story of Zaccheus, the rich little tax collector who wanted to see Jesus. So I think the thing to do, I realized I was looking back through my notes to see if there's anything to glean, and I haven't preached on Zaccheus in probably 14 years. Okay? It's a long time. And so that means it's been that long since I've got to sing the song about Zaccheus. All right? How many of you know the Zaccheus song? All right? Okay. So let's see if we can get this right. You'll have to help me because remember, I'm a instrumentalist. I play and everybody else knows the words. So you'll have to sing loud. All right, ready? Zaccheus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Savior passed that way, he looked up in that tree. And he said, "Zaccheus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today." Good job, guys. Give yourself a hand. Woohoo! Zaccheus, the rich little tax collector. Let's see what the Bible has to say about this, because here's another. Well, let's read and see what it says. Starting verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zaccheus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. Okay, so it's very similar to this other story that we've just read. The young man was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran on ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. Now here's another man that must have wanted to see Jesus if he ran ahead and climbed a tree to get a glimpse of this man. I mean, he gave up all of his, the being a man of wealth and all that, to be respected in the town. He gave all that up when he starts climbing trees just to see somebody walking through town, right? Apparently, he had heard stories about all that Jesus was doing and all that Jesus had done, and he wanted to know what was going on. And so let's go on to verse 7. When Jesus came to that spot, he looked up and he said, Zaccheus, come down at once. I must stay at your home today. So Zaccheus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, he is gone to be the guest of a what? Sinner. The other guys, right? Yeah, those guys. We don't know anything about how the other rich man in the first story, how he got his wealth, but we get an idea that probably Zaccheus is rich because he's a tax collector, and he's a chief among tax collectors, or he's over other tax collectors. And so apparently this short man had sold out to the ruling Roman government, who collected taxes, and he agreed to collect taxes for this hated, ruling, oppressing nation that was so hateful and cared so little for life in general, especially for the lives of those people who they had taken over their countries, that they defeated them and they oppressed them, and they just didn't care about them at all. I mean, they've devised ways, and finally the person who wins apparently the lottery for how to torment people the worst won with the idea of crucifixion that could keep a person alive for several days, having the worst pain that you possibly could have. And that's what the Romans are known for. And they've come in, they've taken over these people's country, their nation. And so they come in and then they overtax them. So they don't want them to build up wealth. All the wealth has to go into Rome, because if they start building up wealth, they'll find ways to hire people to come in, mercenaries, and there might be an uprising, and they might try to gain their freedom back from Rome, and so they overtax them. And then you have people of their own country who would sell out and agree to gather these taxes for the people that the nation of Israel, I would assume, hated. So these people had sold out, and here's Zaccheus, and on top of being a tax collector, he's the head of the tax collectors. And the other thing that the Roman government did, because they didn't care anything about the people in those nations that they were over, you had to collect all the taxes for them, but then you were allowed to collect some for yourself. You could get a little extra for yourself to pay your own salary. And so tax collectors were known for gouging the people and taxing them way, way, way above what they should be taxed, so they could have money, they could get rich. And tax collectors got rich. And Zaccheus was the chief tax collector, and so he even probably got money from the tax collectors that he hired. And so that's what's going on when the crowd is shocked that Jesus is going, that this good Israelite, this Jesus, would go to somebody like Zacchaeus' house, and especially to eat a meal. Now, just to go to his house to contaminate yourself, they had these big issues with all these rules and regulations. After you had been someplace, you had to ritually cleanse yourself. But then Jesus went there to eat a meal. Now, if you want to know how important eating a meal is in that society and to Jesus, think about the one thing that Jesus said to do in remembrance of Him for the rest of His time until He returns, whenever that might be. Now, I know we're going into Advent and we're getting ready to look at the birth of Jesus, but not too long after that, we'll get to the Lenten season, and we're going to talk a lot leading up to the night when Jesus had His Last Supper with His disciples. And when He did that, this meal was extremely important. When you eat a meal with somebody, there's just something different about that, right? We've eaten meals with some of you. We've come to your house, we've eaten meals. And there's something special about that. There's a bond that happens there, and that's where Jesus is at. He goes to this sinner's house, this good, rotten, good-for-nothing, turncoat, worst person in the world. And he goes to his house to eat. So the question is, why would he go there instead of to the head rabbi's house or one of the religious, good, faithful servants of God that are doing things right and keeping themselves pure? Why wouldn't Jesus go there? I don't know. Maybe some of those people would not have welcomed Jesus. Maybe they weren't too sure about who Jesus was. Maybe there were some of them that didn't want to change. They were pretty proud of who they were, and they kind of liked things the way they were. Or maybe if they were leaders, maybe they had this certain amount of power and prestige. And if they invited Jesus over, and Jesus always changed things everywhere he went, and if they changed, then they might lose their prestige and their power and authority, and maybe that would just be too much. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say why Jesus didn't go there for one. But maybe it was because they didn't really think they needed Jesus. The change, I'm pretty good. I'm good. You've heard people say that, right? I'm good. Well, whatever the reason was for the people, for Jesus not going there, it might have been for them to not want to have Jesus over. Jesus chose Zaccheus to go to because Jesus was on a mission. Jesus was on a mission. Now, have you ever been on a mission? Have you ever been on a mission and where you were like, I don't mean a mission trip, I mean a mission. You were on a mission to get something done? I overheard a couple of preachers talking at a meeting that we had to go to recently, and I was listening to one tell the other, and he said, just a while back we had our first grandchild. He said, and we got a call on Sunday morning that our daughter-in-law was getting ready to have our first grandchild. They were headed to the hospital. And when my wife got the call, she said, let's go. And he says, it's Sunday morning, I'm a little busy. As soon as church is over, let's go. And he said, well, I've got a meeting right after that. And so she said, as soon as that meeting's over, I know it's mid-afternoon, getting close to evening, but when that meeting's over, I'm going to pack, I'll have your stuff packed, and let's get out of town. And he said, I tell you what, let's just wait till tomorrow. We'll get up bright and early Monday morning, and we'll go see that grandbaby. It's first grandchild, they may not even have the baby yet. And the wife, the way I heard the story there as I was listening to them talk, the wife told him, well, I'm not going to say what they said, but I just tell you that was basically, there's no way, wherever that place is, that they weren't going to go the very second they could go. Well, the problem was, it was like if you drove steady, it was a 10-hour trip. And it usually took them about 12 hours to get to there because they stopped 3 or 4 times and they did things and they had to rest their legs, rest their back, grab a bite to eat and so forth. And he said, it's just going to be too long. He said, no, you get in the car, I'll drive. She was on a mission. Now, what I heard say, that they'd never, ever made the trip less than 11 hours. I think it was like normally 11, 12-hour trip. They made it in 9 hours. She drove the whole way. 1 10-minute stop was all they had to do. And the difference was she was on a mission. They got there right after the baby was born as they continued the story, and they were thrilled to be there. But have you ever been on a mission? You see, when Jesus was here and when Jesus was walking through Jericho that day, Jesus was on a mission. What was Jesus' mission? What was Jesus trying to do? Well, if you go back to Luke chapter 5, there's a really good thing there where Jesus is talking to, again, some Pharisees and legal experts, the people that were griping about him going to Zaccheus' house. And this is in chapter 5, starting with verse 30. And it says this: the Pharisees and their legal experts grumbled against his disciples, this is Jesus' disciples. They said, listen to this, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors? Okay, this is where Jesus is at here, right? Tax collectors and sinners. Why do you do that? Listen to Jesus' answer. Jesus answered, healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. I didn't come to call righteous people, in other words, people who know that they're good. I didn't come to call righteous people, but sinners to change their hearts and lives. Jesus was very intentional about going to Zaccheus' house because here was a man who was sick and needed a doctor. Here was a man who was doing things wrong and needed to change. Here was a person who was a sinner apparently and needed salvation. You know, Jesus very intentionally went to spend time, all the time, with the one that the others pushed away. He would go and that's where he would spend his time. See, Jesus went to the one who needed him, even in this story, to the one who needed change. And let's see what happens with Zaccheus. We know the first rich man in this first story, he went away sad, right? Unwilling to change. Listen to this, though, starting in verse 8. Zaccheus stopped and said to the Lord, so he's come to his house and he's eaten and he's there and he looks at him and he says, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this household because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one, or the Son of Man, came to seek and save the lost. So there is Jesus' mission. There it is. That's what Jesus came to do, to seek and to save the lost. See, people really can change. People really can change. So what does it look like when a person changes? What does that look like? A person changes. What is that? How do we see that in our own eyes? And you know, well, Jesus reminds Zaccheus that he too has value. He says, you or he is a son of Abraham as well. He too is one of God's children. And then when Zaccheus changes, as is the case with us, when we change to follow Jesus Christ more closely, it didn't just benefit Zaccheus, but all of those that he dealt in business with. And the same way is true for us. So right? You caught that in the story, right? So Zaccheus didn't just become a better man, and now suddenly Zaccheus is just better, and he and Jesus have their own thing going, right? What's really happening here is Zaccheus changes to become more like Jesus, to follow Jesus Christ, and now the people he collects taxes from are better. Wow. The people he does business with on a daily basis is better because he's following Jesus more closely. The people who have great need in their community have great need. He's giving half of everything he owns away to those in need. The same should be the case with us. As we follow Jesus more closely now than we have in the past, then it ought to be better for those around us and not just for us personally. What does Jesus' mission look like? Jesus' mission is to save the lost, right? To seek and to save the lost. Jesus tells us a story back in Luke chapter 15 that explains God's idea of how we will act when we follow Jesus. Okay, so as we follow Jesus more closely in 2020 than we have in 2019, then here's a picture of what that looks like. This is Jesus telling the story in Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 4. Suppose, Jesus says, someone among you had 100 sheep and lost one of them. Wouldn't he leave the other 99 in the pasture and search for the lost one until he finds it? And when he finds it, he is thrilled and places it on his shoulders. And when he arrives home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Celebrate with me because I found my lost sheep." In the same way, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both heart and life than over 99 righteous people who have no need to change their hearts and lives. Just a real quick question. Real quick. We won't hang on it too long. Are you a person that your life needs change? Are you? Or are you one that doesn't need change? Okay. You can think about that later. I hope you have a ton of Christian friends. Now, I don't mean that by their size. I mean that by the number, okay? Hope you have lots of good Christian friends, because Christian friends are joy to be with, right? They're the people that you laugh together with. They're the people that you get together with, and when you're with them, you build up other people, you lift other people up, you help other people, you get together and go lay some flooring at somebody's house, or whatever it is you do. You kind of pull your people together and you do some of those things. And I hope you have lots of those. But I think also in our lives, we also are called to join with Jesus' mission, and that is to seek and to save the lost. That's also part of what we're called to do. So here's my second question. Do you have some friends that need some seeking and saving? I really hope you do. I mean, we need good Christian friends and we need lots of them. But I hope you have some people that you know that need some seeking and need some saving. You know, what I find is the biggest issue for a lot of us as United Methodists is that we're not real comfortable with seeking and saving. Am I wrong? It's just kind of like out of our comfort zone. It's just, we have trouble being bold enough to invite people to know Jesus Christ. And even though we're called to be on our mission, we want to follow Him, and we try real hard, but it comes to that point, we really hang on to that one thing that we did, a couple of decades ago, where we'd say everybody's a preacher, use words if you have to. We just want to live a good life in front of other people and hope everybody sees that. But sometimes God calls us to seek and to help in the saving process, help Jesus on His mission. So let me tell you something. I want to do this. This is good. It's been a good time for us to do this sermon, because we're going to do something that's going to make you helping to seek and to save the lost. It's going to make that the easiest thing you could ever do in your life. Okay? It's going to be easy as eating. All right? Are you ready for this? Over 70%, well over 70% of people in the United States believe that a part of the Christmas season, the Christmas celebration, should include attending a church service. In the United States, and supposedly, we're no longer a Christian nation, but even in the United States, over 70%, well over 75% of the people believe that the Christmas celebration of Christmas should include attendance in a worship service. So here's how we're making this easy. Do you realize that on Christmas Eve itself, just that one day, that we are giving you 5 opportunities to invite somebody to know Christ in coming to worship? We're going to be sharing, Zach and I have talked long and hard this year about what we want to do with Christmas Eve this year, and we're just doing Jesus this year. By the way, I really loved the drummer boy last year. I really did. I love talking about the gifts. This year, it's just Jesus. We're going to talk about knowing Jesus. We're going to talk about who Jesus is, how Jesus is beneficial in our lives. And there's going to be, if you have children, we're going to have a children's service at 4 in the afternoon. If they like traditional anthem-type Christmas carols, then we're going to do that at 2:30 on Christmas Eve. And we'll have 6 and 8 services that are going to be led by our contemporary group that are going to be not real wild, but upbeat. And then at 11 o'clock, here's a cool one. At 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve night, Margie and Zach and I are going to get together, and we're putting together a living room, awesome, joyful, super comfortable worship experience that anybody would want, if they came, would want to know Jesus Christ. And so we're helping you. You know, even if it's really hard, again, it's a 75% chance that the people you know, even if they're not, you understand, if they're not what you understand as Christian and they don't attend church, that 70% chance that they think that they ought to go at least then. So they know that's what they ought to do. And so you're just kind of helping them do what they feel like they need to do. And then we're giving you all these opportunities with some of the best children's service I've seen on that day, regular great worship services, and then a super comfortable midnight. And if that's not enough, if you have somebody that's really hurting this Christmas season, we're doing the Blue Christmas season. This year we're doing it down at First Church on the 22nd, that Sunday night. 6 opportunities outside of Sunday worship to help Jesus in His mission of seeking and saving the lost. Really easy. It's not hard. It's not something you have to work at. See, here's the thing. See, I really think people can change. And we have to want to change. But I think to really change, sometimes there has to be some help from the outside as well. And Jesus is that help. And Jesus' mission is to work with you to seek and to save those you know who are lost. And He's inviting you to join with Him in that process. And remember, standing right here was the best rabbi, the best teacher in all of Jericho. Standing next to him was one of the wealthiest, godliest men that the community ever knew. And right next to him was a family that had done every single thing right with their children. Their children were all just perfect, and the world was good because they were really, really good religious folk. And behind them, in one of those trees over there, was this little sinner guy that had stuck a knife in his neighbor's back and twisted it for his own benefit. And we know where Jesus went. Jesus went with him because he needed change, and for somehow Jesus knew he was willing to change. I invite you to look at your own heart to see where you need to change. And I invite you as well to decide Who is God calling me to help in seeking and saving the lost so that we can be a part of Jesus' mission? Would you pray with me?